An original story, narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. Eleanor Mercer stands near the charity table at the county autumn assembly, her hands steady as she pours tea for a tenant's wife, when the doors open and Julian Ashworth walks back into her life. 20 years have passed since he left without a word, married another woman 3 months later, and turned her name into a subject of whispered pity across 3 counties. Now he crosses the floor toward her, and every conversation in the room dies. She watches him approach with her heart beating so hard she can feel it in her throat. And when he says her name, just her name, nothing more, something inside her trembles so violently she thinks the teacup in her hand might shatter. She greets him with devastating formality, turns back to the tenant's wife mid-sentence, and continues as if he were merely a draft from an open door. That night, alone in her chamber at Whitmore Hall, her hands shake so badly she cannot unfasten her own buttons. The assembly rooms are warm with candlelight and the press of bodies, the air thick with the mingled scents of beeswax and wool and the faint sweetness of spiced wine. Eleanor Mercer stands near the charity table in deep garnet silk, her hair pinned severely back, her posture the product of 20 years spent proving she is more than the woman Julian Ashworth left behind. She is 41. She manages 50 tenant families, runs a charity school for their children, and serves on every committee that matters in the county. She has not spoken Julian's name aloud in a decade. The doors at the far end of the hall open. The noise does not stop immediately. It ebbs in waves, rippling outward from the entrance as heads turn and conversations falter. Eleanor does not look up. She continues pouring tea for Mrs. Hewitt, whose husband farms the eastern parcels of the Mercer estate, and listens to the woman's account of her daughter's progress at the charity school with every appearance of complete attention. But she knows. She knows before she hears the footsteps crossing the floor. She knows before Lady Phoebe Weston's voice goes sharp with delighted malice 2 tables away. She knows because the air in the room has changed, because the weight of 20 years has just walked through the door. Eleanor finishes pouring the tea. She sets the pot down with careful precision. She looks up. Julian Ashworth, Duke of Hartmere, stands 10 feet away. He is grayer than she remembers. The dark hair at his temples shot through with silver. His face is leaner, harder, the bones more prominent. He wears black, as if he is still in mourning, though his wife has been dead for 7 years. He looks at Eleanor as if the entire room has vanished. The silence is absolute now. Every eye in the assembly is on them. Julian takes 3 steps forward. He stops just beyond the reach of propriety, close enough that she can see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the exhaustion written into every plane of his face. Eleanor, her name in his voice. It has been 20 years since she heard it, and it sounds exactly the same. For one unguarded second, everything inside her trembles. Her breath catches. Her fingers tighten on the edge of the table. She feels the walls she has spent 2 decades building crack straight down the center. Then she remembers who she is, what she has become, what he made her become. She inclines her head with perfect, devastating formality. Your Grace, welcome home. Her voice is cool and even, the voice of a woman greeting a stranger of rank. She does not extend her hand. She does not smile. She holds his gaze for precisely 3 seconds, then turns back to Mrs. Hewitt and continues their conversation as if Julian Ashworth were nothing more than an interruption, already forgotten. The assembly does not breathe. Eleanor can feel the shock rippling through the room, can feel Lady Phoebe's avid attention like a blade against her skin. She pours another cup of tea. Her hands do not shake. She will not allow them to shake. Not here, not in front of him. Julian stands frozen for a heartbeat longer. Then he bows stiffly and turns away. The noise in the room resumes slowly, cautiously, like a held breath finally released. Eleanor smiles at Mrs. Hewitt and asks after her son's apprenticeship. She does not look toward the door. She does not watch Julian leave. She remains at the charity table for another full hour, pouring tea and discussing tenant concerns and accepting donations for the school with flawless composure. When she finally returns to Whitmore Hall, it is past midnight. The house is dark and silent. Rosalind, her 16-year-old niece, is asleep upstairs. Eleanor climbs the stairs to her chamber, closes the door, and leans against it. Her hands are shaking, Not the faint tremor of fatigue, but a violent, uncontrollable shaking that runs from her fingertips to her shoulders. She tries to unfasten the buttons at the back of her gown, and cannot. Her fingers will not obey. She sinks onto the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, and stares at the wall. Julian is back. After 20 years, he is back. She does not cry. She has not cried over Julian Ashworth since she was 23 years old, and finally understood that he was not coming back, that no explanation would arrive, that she would spend the rest of her life not knowing why. She taught herself not to cry. She taught herself not to feel. But tonight, alone in the dark, her hands shake so badly, she has to press them flat against her knees to make them stop. The note arrives the next morning, delivered by a boy from Hartmere Park. It is brief and formal, written in Julian's careful hand. He requests the honor of calling upon her at Whitmore Hall at her earliest convenience. He mentions, with studied neutrality, that he has recently come into possession of certain documents relating to her late father's estate and believes she may wish to review them. Eleanor reads the note twice. Then she sends word that he may call at 2 o'clock that afternoon. She receives him in the small parlor, the one she uses for estate business and tenants with grievances. It is a cold room, deliberately so. The windows face north. The furniture is plain and functional. There are no flowers, no personal touches, nothing to suggest warmth or welcome. She has the fire left unlit, though the October air is sharp enough to warrant it. Julian arrives precisely at 2. Eleanor is already seated when he enters. Her account books open on the desk before her, as if he is interrupting more important work. She does not rise. She gestures to the chair across from her. "Your Grace." He sits. He looks older in daylight, the lines of exhaustion deeper. He carries a leather folder, which he sets carefully on the edge of the desk. "Thank you for seeing me. You mentioned my father's estate. I assumed it was a matter of some urgency." Her voice is clipped, businesslike. She will not make this easy for him. She will not soften. Julian opens the folder and withdraws a single sheet of paper. He slides it across the desk toward her. "This is a copy of a loan guarantee. Your father signed 22 years ago. The original was held by my father, the late Duke. It came to light when I was settling his estate after his death." Eleanor picks up the document. She scans it quickly, her practiced eye catching the salient points. A loan of £8,000, guaranteed against the Mercer estate. The date is 3 months before Julian left. She sets the paper down. "I was not aware of this loan. Your father repaid it 2 years later. In full. There is no outstanding debt. Why bring it to my attention now?" Julian's jaw tightens. He looks down at his hands, then back at her. "Because my father used that loan as leverage against me the night before I left." The room is very still. Eleanor does not move. "He told me," Julian continues, his voice low and deliberate, "that if I did not marry Portia Dane and sever all connection with you, he would call in the loan immediately. Your father would have lost Whitmore Hall. Your family would have been ruined." Eleanor absorbs this without expression. She has spent 20 years learning to control her face, her voice, her every visible reaction. She will not break now. "So you left to protect my family?" "Yes." "And you married Lady Portia 3 months later?" "Yes." "And you never sent word, never wrote, never explained?" Julian's hands tighten on the arms of his chair. "I could not. My father made it clear that any contact with you would result in the same consequence. As long as he lived, the threat remained." Eleanor nods slowly. She picks up the document again, studies it with apparent calm. "And when did your father die?" 2 years ago." 2 years, yes." She sets the paper down very carefully. "And when did my father repay this loan?" Julian's face goes pale. 2 years after I left." Eleanor meets his eyes. Her voice is soft, almost gentle. It is the gentlest cruelty she has ever inflicted. "So your sacrifice, Your Grace, had an expiration date. 2 years of necessity, 18 years of choice." Julian flinches as if she has struck him. "Eleanor, you could have come back at any time after my father repaid the loan. You could have written. You could have sent word through any one of a dozen mutual acquaintances. But you did not. You stayed in London. You remained married. And I remained here, the subject of pity and speculation, building a life out of the ruins you left behind. I know. Do you?" Her voice cracks just slightly on the question. She hates herself for it. She hates him for hearing it. Julian leans forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. I was a coward. I told myself it was sacrifice, that I was protecting you, that leaving was the noble choice. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid of my father. Afraid of what it would cost to defy him. And when the loan was repaid, and the threat was gone, I was afraid of something worse. What? Admitting that I had chosen wrong. That I had given you up for nothing. That I was not the man I wanted to believe I was. Eleanor stands. The movement is abrupt, almost violent. She walks to the window and stares out at the gray October sky. Why are you here, Julian? Because you deserve the truth. I deserved the truth 20 years ago. Yes, she turns to face him. I do not want your guilt. I do not want your apologies. I built this estate into something my father never imagined. I run a school that educates 30 tenant children. I manage 50 families, and I do it better than half the landowners in this county. I did that without you. I did that because of you. Because you left me no choice but to become someone who did not need you. Julian rises slowly from his chair. I know. I have watched you, Eleanor, from a distance. I know what you have built, and I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I came back because I owed you this. The truth, all of it. What happens now is your choice. Eleanor crosses the room and opens the door. Then I choose for you to leave. Julian picks up the folder. He walks to the door, then stops just beside her. I am staying at Hartmere. If you wish to speak to me again, you know where to find me. I will not. He nods. He does not argue. He walks out into the hall, and Eleanor closes the door behind him. She stands in the cold parlor for a long time, staring at the closed door. Then she returns to her desk, picks up the loan document, and tears it cleanly in half. That night, she tells Rosalind only, a very old story turned out to be shorter than I thought. Julian takes up residence at Hartmere Park. The house has stood empty for most of the past decade, maintained by a skeleton staff, but otherwise abandoned. He does not hire an army of servants to restore it. He does not bring in decorators from London or host lavish dinners to re-establish his place in county society. Instead, he works. Eleanor hears about it from her estate manager, Mrs. Calloway, a sharp-eyed woman of 50 whom Eleanor trained herself. The Duke is repairing the tenant cottages on the Hartmere estate. Mrs. Calloway reports one morning over the estate accounts. Himself, with his own hands, replacing thatch, mending fences. The tenants do not know what to make of it. Eleanor keeps her eyes on the ledger. The Duke's affairs are not our concern. No, madam. But there is another matter that is. Eleanor looks up. Mrs. Calloway slides a folded letter across the desk. Lord Philip Dane has filed an enclosure petition with the county assembly. It affects 3 of our tenant farms on the eastern border, the ones that adjoin the old Dane estate. Eleanor opens the letter and reads it quickly. Her jaw tightens. He wants to enclose the common grazing land. Yes, madam. If the petition is approved, our tenants will lose access to the pasture, the Hewitt family, the Carters, and the Marsdens. They cannot sustain their livestock without it. Eleanor sets the letter down. When is the hearing? The harvest fair, 6 weeks from now. Lord Philip has requested that the matter be decided by public assembly, with all landowners and tenants present. Eleanor's mind is already working, calculating, planning. She knows Philip Dane. She knows his sister was Julian's wife. She knows the old Duke and the Dane family were allied by blood and interest for 2 generations. And she knows Philip will use every ounce of that history to pressure Julian into supporting the petition. She is locked into battle now, not just with Philip, but with the past, with Julian's presence at Hartmere, less than 5 miles away, with the fact that county business will force them into proximity, whether she wills it or not. Prepare a full survey of the affected land, Eleanor says. I want maps, tenant testimonies, and a complete accounting of grazing rights dating back 50 years. If Lord Philip wants a public hearing, I will give him one. Mrs. Calloway nods and rises to leave. At the door, she pauses. Madam, the Duke has declined to comment on the petition. He has told Lord Philip he will reserve judgment until the hearing. Eleanor does not look up. As I said, Mrs. Calloway, the Duke's affairs are not our concern. But that night, alone in her study, Eleanor stares at the enclosure petition and feels the walls closing in. Julian is back. Philip Dane is moving against her tenants. And the two battles are not separate. They never were. She is entangled again. Through land, through politics, through geography, through the simple, inescapable fact that Julian Ashworth is 5 miles away, and she cannot make him disappear by force of will alone. The Harvest Charity Committee meets every Thursday in the assembly rooms. Eleanor has served on it for 15 years. She chairs the Education Subcommittee and manages the allocation of funds for the tenant school. It is work she knows intimately, work she can do in her sleep. Julian attends the third meeting. He enters quietly, taking a seat near the back of the room. Eleanor is at the head of the table, reviewing the school's quarterly expenditures with the vicar and 2 other landowners. She sees Julian the moment he arrives. She does not acknowledge him. She continues her report without pause, her voice steady and clear. But she feels his presence like a weight against her skin. She feels his eyes on her. She feels the room's attention shift and fracture, half on her words and half on the fact that the Duke of Hartmere is sitting 10 feet away, watching her with an expression she cannot read. When the meeting adjourns, Julian approaches the table. The vicar and the other committee members scatter with the studied casualness of people desperate to avoid being caught in the middle of someone else's history. Julian stops on the opposite side of the table. Miss Mercer, Your Grace, I wanted to offer my support for the school's expansion. If additional funding is required, I would be pleased to contribute. Eleanor gathers her papers with deliberate care. The school is adequately funded, but I will note your offer in the committee records. Eleanor, is there anything else, Your Grace? Julian's mouth tightens into a thin line. He shakes his head. No, nothing else. He turns to leave, and that is when Rosalind appears. Eleanor's niece is 16, bright and curious, and utterly unaware of the history between her aunt and the man now standing awkwardly by the door. Rosalind has been helping to organize the children's recital for the Harvest Fair, and she has a dozen questions about the program. Your Grace, she says, smiling with the easy confidence of a girl who has never been taught to fear a duke. I heard you attended the musicale in London last season. Do you think the tenants would enjoy a small concert at the fair? Nothing formal, just a few songs. Julian's expression softens. He looks at Rosalind with something close to tenderness. I think they would enjoy it very much. Wonderful. Aunt Eleanor, may I include it in the program? Eleanor forces a smile. Of course, Rosalind. Rosalind beams and launches into a detailed description of her plans. Julian listens with genuine attention, asking questions, offering suggestions. He is kind to her, patient, warm in a way Eleanor has not seen in 20 years. Eleanor watches them together and feels something crack inside her chest. Not anger, not jealousy, something worse. Agonized tenderness. The unbearable recognition that Julian would have been a good father, that he would have been kind to their children if they had ever had the chance to have them. When Rosalind finally excuses herself, Julian lingers. She is remarkable, he says quietly. You have done well by her. She is my brother's daughter. I did what was necessary. You did more than that. Eleanor meets his eyes. Do not presume to know what I have done, Julian. You were not here. She walks out before he can respond. That evening, Lady Phoebe Weston calls at Whitmore Hall. She is ostensibly delivering an invitation to a dinner party. But Eleanor knows better. Phoebe has been the county's most reliable source of gossip for 30 years, and she has never forgiven Eleanor for refusing to be humiliated into obscurity after Julian left. Phoebe settles into the drawing room with a rustle of silk and a smile that does not reach her eyes. My dear Eleanor, the entire county is talking about the Duke's return. So charming, do you not think? And so devoted to restoring Hartmere. He was at the committee meeting, I hear. He was. And you spoke to him, briefly. Phoebe's smile sharpens. How generous of you, my dear, after everything. But then, you have always been so very forgiving. Eleanor sets down her teacup with a soft click. I have not forgiven anything, Phoebe. But neither do I intend to give the county the satisfaction of watching me collapse into hysterics every time the Duke enters a room. I have more important concerns. Of course you do. The Enclosure petition, I hear. Such a tiresome business. Though I am sure the Duke will support Lord Philip. They are family, after all. The Duke has not declared his position. Not yet, but he will. Blood is blood, Eleanor. You know that as well as anyone. Phoebe leaves 20 minutes later, having extracted no visible reaction, and delivered her poison with flawless politeness. Eleanor sees her to the door, thanks her for the invitation, and declines with perfect courtesy. Then she returns to the drawing room, sits in the chair Phoebe vacated, and stares into the fire. The social cost is already mounting. The whispers, the speculation, the barely concealed delight of women like Phoebe, who have been waiting 20 years for Eleanor to finally break. She will not break. She will not give them the satisfaction. But that night, when Rosalind develops a fever, Eleanor sits by her bedside and feels the exhaustion settle into her bones. Rosalind is restless, her skin hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. The doctor has been called, but it will be hours before he arrives from the neighboring village. Eleanor bathes Rosalind's forehead with cool water and murmurs reassurances she does not feel. The girl is strong. The doctor will say it is nothing serious. She will recover in a few days. But Eleanor has lost too much already. Her parents, her brother. She cannot lose Rosalind. At midnight, she hears footsteps on the gravel drive. She goes to the window and looks out. Julian is there, standing just outside the gate. He does not approach the house. He does not call out. He simply stands in the October rain, his coat pulled tight around him, and waits. Eleanor stares at him through the dark glass. She should send him away. She should ignore him. She should do anything but what she does next. She goes downstairs, wraps a blanket around her shoulders, and steps out into the rain. Julian turns at the sound of the door. His face is wet, his hair plastered to his forehead. I heard Rosalind was ill, he says. I did not want you to be alone. Eleanor's throat tightens. You cannot be here. I know. If anyone sees you, I know. They stand in the rain, 10 feet apart. And for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor does not have the strength to send him away. Go home, Julian. Is she all right? I do not know yet. May I wait? Eleanor closes her eyes. She should say no. She should turn around and go back inside and lock the gate behind her. Instead, she says, do what you like. She goes back into the house. Julian remains outside the gate. At dawn, the fever breaks. Rosalind wakes, weak but coherent, asking for water. The doctor arrives an hour later and pronounces it a mild ague. Nothing to fear. Eleanor thanks him, pays him, and sees him out. Then she goes to the window. Julian is still there. He has not moved. He is asleep, slumped against the stone pillar of the gate, soaked through and shivering. Eleanor picks up the blanket she wore the night before. She walks outside, crosses the drive, and drapes it across his shoulders without waking him. Then she goes back inside and locks the door. Mrs. Calloway comes to Eleanor's study 3 days later with a ledger and an expression Eleanor has learned to recognize as trouble. Madam, I have been reviewing the school's funding records. Eleanor looks up from her correspondence. Is there a discrepancy? Not a discrepancy, a question. The primary endowment for the school, the one that funds the teachers' salaries and the building maintenance, comes from a trust administered by a solicitor in London. I have been corresponding with that solicitor for 7 years, but I have never been able to identify the original donor. Eleanor frowns. I was told the trust was established by a group of anonymous benefactors. That is what the solicitor claimed. But I have pressed him for clarification. Given the expansion plans we are considering, he finally provided a name. The trust was established on instruction from the Hartmere estate. The room is very still. Eleanor sets down her pen. The Hartmere estate. Yes, madam. 7 years ago. 7 years. Julian's wife died 7 years ago. Eleanor's hands tighten on the edge of the desk. You are certain? I have the solicitor's letter here. Mrs. Calloway slides the letter across the desk. Eleanor reads it twice. There is no ambiguity. The trust was funded by the Hartmere estate. The instructions came directly from Julian Ashworth, Duke of Hartmere. Eleanor folds the letter carefully. Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. That will be all. Mrs. Calloway hesitates. Madam, if you wish to, that will be all. Mrs. Calloway leaves. Eleanor sits alone in the study, staring at the letter. Julian funded her school for 7 years, without her knowledge, without asking for recognition or gratitude. He was present in her life, shaping the institution she considers her greatest achievement. and she never knew. She stands abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. She does not send word ahead. She does not wait for a formal invitation. She goes to Hartmere. Julian is in the library when she arrives, surrounded by half-unpacked crates and stacks of books. He looks up when the door opens, and his expression shifts from surprise to something close to dread. "Eleanor, you paid for my school." He sets down the book in his hands. "Yes. For how long?" 7 years. Eleanor crosses the room in 3 strides. "You had no right. I know. That school is mine. I built it. I designed the curriculum. I hired the teachers. I fought the county assembly for permission to educate tenant girls alongside the boys. I did that, not you." Julian's voice is quiet, steady. "I know. I never claimed otherwise. The funding was anonymous. I did not want recognition. I wanted to help." "Help?" Eleanor's voice breaks on the word. "You were not here, Julian. You were in London, living your life, married to another woman. And all the while you were watching me, funding my work, shaping my life from a distance. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes. Do you?" She is shaking now, not with anger, but with something worse. Fear. The fear that her independence was never fully her own. That the thing she is most proud of, the school, the estate, the life she built, was shaped by a man who was not even present. Julian takes a step toward her, then stops. "I did not fund the school to control you. I funded it because I believed in what you were doing. Because I knew you would build something remarkable, and I wanted to be part of it, in the only way I could. You could have come back. I know. You could have written. You could have asked. You could have been here. I know." Eleanor turns away, her hands pressed to her face. "I do not know what to do with this. I do not know how to reconcile the man who left me with the man who paid for my school. I do not know which one is real." Julian's voice is raw. "Both. I am both. I am the coward who left you, and I am the man who has spent 20 years trying to be worthy of you from a distance. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to see me as I am. All of it. The failure and the love, and the 20 years I wasted because I was too afraid to come home." Eleanor lowers her hands. She looks at him, and for the first time since he returned, she does not see the man who left. She sees the man who stayed away, and she does not know which is worse. "I need time." Julian nods. "Take all the time you need." Eleanor walks out of the library, out of Hartmere, and does not look back. Eleanor withdraws. She cancels her attendance at the next 2 committee meetings, sending word that she is occupied with estate business. She communicates with Julian only through written notes, formal and brief. When county matters require coordination, she does not see him. She does not speak to him. She retreats into the work she knows, the life she built, and tries to convince herself that she does not need to understand him, to continue without him. Julian nearly leaves. Mrs. Calloway hears it from one of the Hartmere staff. The Duke has instructed his valet to prepare for travel, has written to his solicitor in London, has made arrangements to close the house again. Eleanor hears the news and feels nothing, or tells herself she feels nothing. She goes about her work with the same meticulous care she has always brought to it. She reviews the tenant accounts. She visits the school. She prepares her case against Philip Dane's Enclosure petition with ruthless precision. But at night alone, she lies awake and stares at the ceiling and wonders what it means that Julian is leaving again. Whether she drove him away, whether she wants him to stay. Then Rosalind's fever returns. It is worse this time. The doctor comes and goes, his face grave. He prescribes rest and fluids and time, but Eleanor can see the worry in his eyes. Rosalind is strong, but she is young, and the fever is high. Eleanor sits by her bedside for 2 days and nights, barely sleeping, changing the cool compresses on Rosalind's forehead and murmuring reassurances that sound hollow, even to her own ears. On the 3rd night, she goes to the window and looks out. Julian is there, outside the gate, in the rain, again. Eleanor stares at him through the glass. He has not come to the door. He has not asked to be let in. He is simply there, standing vigil, as if his presence alone could keep Rosalind safe. She should send him away. She should tell him his guilt is not welcome here, that his penance does not absolve him. But she does not. She goes back to Rosalind's bedside and stays there until dawn. When the fever finally breaks and Rosalind falls into a deep, peaceful sleep, Eleanor returns to the window. Julian is asleep against the gate, his coat soaked through, his head bowed. Eleanor picks up a blanket and goes outside. She crosses the drive, silent on the wet gravel, and drapes the blanket across his shoulders. He does not wake. She stands there for a moment, looking down at him, and feels something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something gentler than the rage she has nursed for 2 decades. She goes back inside and locks the door. But this time, she does not tell herself she feels nothing. A week later, Eleanor is at the charity school reviewing the autumn term schedule. When Julian arrives, she looks up from the desk and finds him standing in the doorway, hesitant, as if he is not sure he has the right to be there. "May I come in?" Eleanor sets down her pen. "If you wish." Julian enters and closes the door behind him. He does not sit. He stands by the window, looking out at the small courtyard where the children play during breaks. "I wanted to thank you," he says quietly, "for letting me stay outside the gate. I know it was not for me, but it mattered." Eleanor does not respond. Julian turns to face her. "There is something else I need to tell you. About Portia." Eleanor's hands still on the desk. "You do not owe me an accounting of your marriage. I know, but I want you to understand." He takes a breath. "Portia knew there had been someone else. I never told her your name, but she knew. She was not cruel about it. She simply accepted it as one accepts the weather. We were civil to each other. We were kind, but we were never in love. Julian, when she was dying, she asked me a question. She asked if I had ever tried to find the woman I left behind. I told her no, and she said, 'Then you are a coward, and I have wasted my life on you.' Those were her last words to me. Go and find whoever it was." Eleanor's throat tightens. "It took me 5 years to obey a dying woman's instruction." Julian continues. 5 years to find the courage to come back. That is who I am, Eleanor. A man who needed his wife's death to give him permission to do what he should have done 20 years ago. Eleanor stands slowly. She crosses the room and stops a few feet away from him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I do not want you to think I came back expecting forgiveness. I came back because I owed you the truth. All of it. The cowardice, the waste, the fact that I loved you then, and I have loved you every day since, and I was too afraid to do anything about it, until it was far too late." Eleanor's breath catches. "Do not say that. It is the truth. The truth does not matter, Julian. Not anymore. You cannot undo 20 years with a confession." "I know." They stand in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Finally, Eleanor speaks. "The Enclosure hearing is in 2 weeks. Philip Dane will expect your support. He was your wife's brother. Your families were allied for generations. I know what he expects. And what will you do?" Julian meets her eyes. "What is right?" Eleanor nods slowly. She does not thank him. She does not touch him. She simply says, "Then we will see." Julian leaves. Eleanor sits back down at the desk and stares at the schedule in front of her. The words blur. She presses her hands flat against the wood and breathes. She does not know what to do with the truth Julian has given her. She does not know how to reconcile the man who left with the man who is standing outside her gate in the rain. She does not know if love is enough to bridge 20 years of silence. But she knows this. She is not done with him yet, and he is not done with her. The harvest fair is held on the common green, a wide stretch of open land at the center of the county. Tenants and gentry gather together, the social divisions softened by the shared work of bringing in the season's yield. There are stalls selling preserves and wool, children running between the tables, the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread in the air. The Enclosure hearing is scheduled for midday, in the open space before the assembly platform. Eleanor arrives early, her case prepared, her maps and documents organized in a leather folder. She wears deep blue, severe and elegant, her hair pinned back with the same meticulous care she brings to everything. Philip Dane is already there, surrounded by a cluster of landowners who have supported the petition. He is a tall man in his 50s, with the casual arrogance of someone who has never been told no. When he sees Eleanor, he inclines his head with a smile that does not reach his eyes. "Miss Mercer, how kind of you to join us." Eleanor sets her folder on the table. "Lord Philip." The tenants begin to gather. The Hewitts, the Carters, the Marsdens, the families whose livelihoods depend on the common grazing land. They stand behind Eleanor, quiet and watchful. their faces lined with the anxiety of people who know their futures are being decided by forces beyond their control. Philip calls the hearing to order. He presents his case with polished confidence, citing agricultural efficiency, improved yields, the need to modernize outdated practices. He does not look at the tenants once. When he finishes, Eleanor stands. She speaks clearly and without notes, laying out the history of the common grazing rights, the economic impact on the tenant families, the long-term sustainability of shared land use. She presents maps showing the boundaries, testimonies from tenants, describing their reliance on the pasture, calculations demonstrating that enclosure would devastate 3 families without meaningfully improving yields for the Dane estate. She is precise, methodical, devastating. When she finishes, Philip smiles. A commendable effort, Miss Mercer. But I fear you misunderstand the purpose of this hearing. We are not here to preserve outdated sentiments. We are here to make decisions based on sound economic principles. The common land is inefficient. Enclosure will benefit the county as a whole. It will benefit your estate, Eleanor says evenly, at the expense of families who have worked this land for generations. Philip's smile sharpens. With all due respect, Miss Mercer, you are a baronet's daughter. You manage your estate admirably, but you are not a peer. You do not have the experience or the authority to dictate land policy to those of us who do. The insult lands with deliberate precision. Eleanor feels the eyes of the crowd on her, feels the weight of every whispered doubt about a woman managing an estate, a woman speaking in public, a woman with ideas above her station. She does not flinch. I have managed the Mercer estate for 20 years, Lord Philip. I have increased yields, improved tenant welfare, and maintained financial stability through 2 failed harvests and a banking crisis. If experience and authority are your criteria, I believe I meet them. Philip opens his mouth to respond, and Julian stands. The crowd goes silent. Julian has been sitting at the edge of the assembly, apart from the other landowners, his expression unreadable. Now he steps forward, and every eye turns toward him. Your Grace, Philip says, his voice warm with expectation. I am pleased to have your support in this matter. Julian does not look at Philip. He looks at the tenants, at the Hewitts and the Carters and the Marstons, at the families who have gathered to hear their fate decided. Then he looks at Eleanor. I do not support the petition, Julian says. His voice is calm, steady, and carries across the green. Miss Mercer is correct. Enclosure will benefit 1 estate at the expense of 3 families. That is not sound economics. It is exploitation. Philip's face darkens. Your Grace, our families have been allied for generations. Surely you do not intend to side with. I intend to side with what is right. Julian turns to face the assembly. 20 years ago, I let fear choose for me. I left the woman who understood this county better than any lord in it. And I told myself it was sacrifice. It was cowardice. I will not be a coward again. Not with this land. Not with these families. Not with anything that matters. He sits. The hush that follows is complete. Then slowly, the tenants begin to stand. The Hewitts, the Carters, the Marstons. One by one, they rise, and the other tenants rise with them. A quiet, communal refusal that needs no words. Philip looks around the assembly, his face tight with fury. He opens his mouth, closes it, then turns and walks away. The petition collapses, not by formal vote, but by the simple, undeniable fact that the people it would harm have refused it. And the Duke of Hartmere has stood with them. Eleanor remains at the table, her hands resting on the folder of documents she no longer needs. She does not look at Julian. She does not thank him. She simply gathers her papers and walks away. But that evening, as the fair winds down and the lanterns are lit across the green, old Thomas Hale finds her at the charity school. Hale is 70 if he is a day, a retired valet who served the old Duke of Hartmere for 40 years before settling in the village. Eleanor knows him by sight, but they have never spoken. He removes his hat as he enters. Miss Mercer, forgive the intrusion. I wonder if I might have a word. Eleanor gestures to a chair. Of course, Mr. Hale. Hale sits, turning his hat in his hands. I was there today, at the fair. I heard what the Duke said. And I thought it was time I told you what I saw. 20 years ago. Eleanor's breath catches. Hale looks down at his hat. The night before the Duke left, his father called him into the study. I was outside the door. I should not have been listening, but I was. The old Duke told him about the loan. Told him that if he did not marry Lady Portia and leave you alone, he would destroy your family. I heard the Duke, the young Duke. I heard him weeping. In the stable, after. He wept like a boy, Miss Mercer. And then he left. Eleanor's hands tighten in her lap. Why are you telling me this now? Hail meets her eyes. Because I have carried it for 20 years. And today, when I saw the Duke stand up and speak the truth, I thought perhaps it was time I did the same. He was not a coward then, Miss Mercer. He was a young man who believed he was saving you. And he has been punishing himself for it, ever since. Hale stands, places his hat back on his head, and bows. Good evening, Miss Mercer. He leaves. Eleanor sits alone in the schoolroom, staring at the empty chair, and hears the past from a human voice. Not documents, not letters. A man who was there. A witness. She sits for a long time, until the light fades and the room grows cold. Then she goes to Hartmere. Julian is in the library, surrounded by the same half-unpacked crates, the same stacks of books. He looks up when Eleanor enters, and his expression shifts from surprise to something close to fear. Eleanor. She closes the door behind her. Your valet told me what your father did. Julian sets down the book in his hands. I should have told you myself. 20 years ago. Yes, you should have. Eleanor crosses the room. And the school. 7 years of funding my life from a safe distance. That is not love, Julian. That is guilt with a checkbook. He does not defend himself. But you stood at that fair today. Before tenants. Before Philip. Before everyone. And you did not look at me once. Because it was not for you. It was because it was right. Eleanor stops a few feet away from him. That is the first honest thing you have done in 20 years. She sits in the chair across from his desk. Not beside him. Across from him. I will not be the woman who waited. I did not wait. I built. I raised a child. I became someone. If you want to begin, you begin as a stranger, and you earn what you cannot reclaim. Julian's voice is raw. I understand. Do you? Yes. Eleanor stands. Then prove it. She walks out. Julian does not follow. Days pass. Eleanor goes about her work, visiting tenants, reviewing accounts, preparing for the winter term at the school. She does not see Julian. She does not send word. She tells herself she is done. Then, one evening at dusk, she goes to the charity school to retrieve a book she left behind. Julian is there. He is in the courtyard, repairing the fence the autumn storm damaged. He has removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and is working with the same quiet focus she remembers from when they were young. Eleanor stands in the doorway and watches him. He does not see her at first. He finishes driving a nail, tests the board, then steps back to survey his work. You had no right to come here. Julian turns. His face is tired, his hands dirty, his shirt damp with sweat. Eleanor crosses the courtyard. This is mine. This I built without you. I know. That is why I am here, not where we were, where you are. She stops in front of him. She looks at the fence, the careful work, the quiet evidence of a man who has spent days repairing something he was not asked to repair. Why? Because I want to begin. As a stranger. As someone who earns what he cannot reclaim. Eleanor's breath catches. She reaches up, takes his face in both hands, and kisses him. It is not gentle. It is not tentative. It is furious and tender, and full of 20 years of silence and longing, and the unbearable recognition that the man she loved at 21 is standing in the place she built at 41. And both things are true, and she is done pretending the walls were anything but a way to survive his absence. Julian's arms come around her, pulling her close, and for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor does not push him away. When they finally break apart, she rests her forehead against his. This does not mean I forgive you. I know. This does not mean I trust you. I know. This means I am willing to begin, one day at a time. And if you leave again, I will not leave. Eleanor pulls back, looks into his eyes. Prove it. I will. They stand in the fading light, the school behind them, the future uncertain, and for the first time in 20 years, Eleanor allows herself to hope. Winter comes. The county assembly meets again, the same room, the same witnesses. Eleanor stands near the charity table, reviewing donation records with the vicar. She wears deep green, her hair pinned back, her posture as composed as ever. The doors open. Julian enters. He crosses the floor. Every conversation does not die this time. People glance up, note his arrival, and return to their business. The scandal has faded. The shock has worn off. Julian Ashworth is simply the Duke of Hartmere, attending county business like any other landowner. But when he reaches Eleanor, he stops. She looks up. For one unguarded second, everything softens. Then she extends her hand. Julian takes it. His fingers close around hers, warm and steady. "Miss Mercer, Your Grace." They stand there, hands joined, and the room continues around them. The vicar clears his throat and excuses himself. Lady Phoebe Weston watches from across the hall, her expression sour. Eleanor does not care. She has not moved to Hartmere. Julian has not moved to Whitmore. They are two people with separate lives, separate estates, choosing each other one day at a time. It is not the life she imagined at 21. It is not the life she built at 41. It is something new, something earned, something that belongs to both of them, built not on the ruins of the past, but on the careful, deliberate work of the present. Eleanor releases Julian's hand. "There is a committee meeting next Thursday. Will you attend?" "I will." She nods. She returns to her work. Julian moves to speak with the vicar, and in the assembly room where it all began, where she once greeted him with devastating formality and turned away, Eleanor Mercer allows herself to smile.